over a decade, harder work hasn't led to higher incomes. Bigger profits at the top haven't led to better jobs across the board. You can't solve that problem if you can't even see it.
That was President Obama at a fundraiser in Baltimore, Maryland today. The race is on to see which candidate can label the other one as the most out of touch with the American people. Will any of the rhetoric move the needle when it comes to the election? Let's turn to Howard Fineman, NBC News political analyst and editorial director of the Huffington Post Media Group, and MSNBC political analyst Richard Wolff. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Hi there.
Thank you.
Howard, let's start with you. Is the Romney camp handling this teacher, fighter, and firefighter and police officer situation very well?
Well, I don't think so, because they need to be careful, and even a lot of conservative strategists that I talk to, including those who work at American Crossroads, which is one of the leading independent super PACs, say you have to be extremely careful on this, and you have to make sure, if you're a Republican or if you're conservative, that you don't look like you're against the teachers, the firefighters, and the police. Today on his radio show, Rush Limbaugh was trying to argue that those three categories of workers are not public employees. I couldn't quite figure out his logic in the terms of the facts, but politically what he was trying to say is let's be careful, and I don't think Mitt Romney has been.
Well, Richard, to Howard's point, when the American people are polled on this topic, they overwhelmingly want federal money to be spent on teachers and first responders. How in the heck can the Romney campaign get around that?
Well, they cannot, and that's why they're trying to shift the topic of discussion here. You know, Romney's comments today with this strange immersion in the relationship between the federal government and the state government. And, you know, if anyone's been paying attention, they'd know that a third of the stimulus dollars went to shore up state budgets to keep these people in their jobs. So, you know, he's hoping that people don't understand or just accept that there's some arm's length between the two that means the federal government doesn't have a say in this. But Howard's right. The politics of this doesn't work for Mitt Romney. There's also a failure of the bigger argument. How do you create jobs if you want to cut jobs? You may not think public sector jobs are as worthy as private sector ones, but still they're jobs. And if you're going to cut jobs, how do you then have a plan to create them?
Yeah, talking about some strange and fuzzy math. So, Howard, James Carville's firm Democracy Corps came out with a memo today saying the Obama campaign needs to change the economic narrative or risk losing the election. So is the Obama campaign taking this to heart, or is this more of a Carville's ginning it up to try to inspire the team?
Well, there's several things at work here. One of them is the never-ending friction between the Clinton camp and the Obama camp, and two ways of looking at the fate and responsibilities of the Democratic Party.
Right.
The Clinton people were to shorthand it, the pro-business wing of the Democratic Party, right. And they're trying to portray Barack Obama somehow as something other than that. So that's part of it. Another part of it here is that the president does need to talk in more aggressive terms, not only about what he's done right, but what he wants to do. In the end, the argument really isn't about who is more out of touch or in touch. Even if they were perfectly in touch, if they walked the streets, the meanest streets in America, and knew them intimately, which neither of these people, you know, truly does, the question is, what do they want to do about it?
Right.
What is their plan? And it's up to Barack Obama to articulate that convincingly and to argue, as he's trying to do, that Mitt Romney just doesn't have any plan other than no. Well, as the president said today, it's something that Romney could put on a tweet and would still have a lot of characters left.
No doubt. But Richard, given what Howard has just said, and given the tension between the Clinton camp and the Obama camp, not only arguments against the other side, so to speak, but even the internecine squabbles within the Democratic Party about subverting the leadership of Obama while, you know, arguing that he's not pro-business enough. This neoliberalism is creeping through. How does he negotiate that while still trying to get over the message to the other side?
Look, there's going to be second-guessing and hand-rigging and every other form of nervousness that Democrats can conjure up. There was in 2008. People panicked when Sarah Palin got picked. You know, the only framing of this question that really matters is Ronald Reagan's framing of it, which is, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? The Romney camp believes that the answer is already out there. People don't feel good, and therefore they feel worse off. But actually, in January of 2009, this economy was losing 800,000 jobs a month, not gaining 69,000. That was a bad month. 69,000 gain in the last month. The stock market was going down to a bottom of 6,000 something. It's now at 12,000 something. You know, the situation is not what it was in 2009. The president has to tell that story in a convincing way, and as well as doing what Howard says, which is cast forward. If he doesn't portray that sense of forward movement, you know, he won't have done what George Bush did in 2004, which was to say, I know things are bad in Iraq, but we're a whole lot more secure than we were before 9/11.
Sure.
He's got to make that sale.
Well, you got to figure out, did George Bush have a comparable James Carville on his flank, as opposed to a Karl Rove who was reinforcing his point? So, Howard, what do you make of the new poll that shows 49% of Americans believe the GOP is trying to sabotage the economy for political gain?
Well, I think that's something that the president can talk about, but he has to be careful not to talk about it too much. I don't think he can win the election by listing a host of factors and people and institutions to blame for the political and economic predicament that he's in.
Right.
So he can let that sink in, and he can emphasize it, perhaps, by pushing some legislation in Washington and daring and demanding and seeing that the Republicans will veto it. He can do that.
Right.
I would also say, without being unduly Pollyannish about the president's chances here, this is a familiar cycle that we haven't seen the end of. Now you've got the Clinton critics who are out criticizing him. The next man bites dog story will be Obama's former supporters criticizing him. Then there'll be former members of the Obama administration criticizing him. And then at some point, he has to hope, he will hit bottom, and then the polarities will reverse, and it'll be the story of the great comeback.
Wow.
I've seen it a million times, and we're going through it right now. We're actually still in the early stages of it.
That would be an Emersonian outcome, to be sure, the self-remaking of America. But, Richard, is there any reason for the Republicans to lose incentive to stop the strategy of obstruction at this point?
At this point, no, but I do think there is a danger. It cannot, for them, in continuing this obstructionism. You know, this has been a crisis for this country, and if they're just playing politics at a time of crisis, it does not help them. And this cannot be the centerpiece of the Obama campaign, but for Democrats, when they were trying to play politics with national security through the Bush era, they got beaten time and time again.
Right.
Even through their successes in 2006, as long as they were talking about maybe withdrawing funding for the troops, it did not work. Democrats have to have the guts to go out there and say, the Republicans have been playing with the equivalent of withdrawing funding for the troops. Their denial of taking action, their obstructionism, their refusal to support even a Recovery Act that gave a third of the money to tax cuts. That itself was not patriotic. That was not part of what this country stands for.
Well, there you have it from two of the best in the business, Howard Fineman and Richard Wolff. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thanks.
A KKK group in Georgia wants to adopt a highway so they can clean up their image. But they need to clean up a whole lot more than just a highway. We'll have the latest next.